The men arrived at the post office before the morning mail did. Sarah Calloway opened the door. 6 of them stood on the boardwalk. Harlan Briggs at the front, his lawyer beside him holding a folded document. "Miss Calloway," Briggs said, "I trust you've received notice. The Briggs Land Company has acquired this property." "I received a letter," Sarah said. "It was not a legal notice. My lawyer would disagree." "Your lawyer wrote it himself." She kept her voice even. "You don't have the authority to take this building. And you know it." Briggs's smile did not waver. "Now, how would a little widow woman know a thing like that?" The men behind him laughed. Not all of them. 2 looked uncomfortable, but enough. "Step aside, Miss Calloway," Briggs said, and his voice dropped the pretense of courtesy. "We are going to begin the inventory today, whether you cooperate or not." "You are going to stand on that boardwalk," Sarah said, "until someone with actual legal authority tells me otherwise." That was when she heard the second set of boots. One man. Unhurried. The crowd parted without being asked. That's how people always made way for Luke Calder. He was the sheriff of Coldwater, and he had held that position for 7 years, long enough that most people had forgotten what the town felt like before him. He was not a large man in the way that Briggs's hired muscle was large. He was lean and weathered, with the kind of stillness that came from having nothing left to prove. His badge caught the morning light. He did not reach for it. He did not need to. He walked directly to Briggs's lawyer, held out one hand, and waited. The lawyer hesitated, then surrendered the document. Luke read it. He read it the way he read everything, completely, without expression, taking his time while 6 men and 1 woman waited in the September heat. Then he folded it once, twice, and tore it down the center. He tore it again. He let the pieces fall at the lawyer's feet. The street went quiet. "That document," Luke said, "references a land parcel number that does not correspond to this property. It also bears a notary seal from a notary who died in April." He looked at Briggs. Not with anger. With something colder than anger. "You want to try again, Harlan, or are we done here?" Briggs's jaw tightened. "Sheriff, I have every right to. You have the right to walk back to your office and speak with an actual attorney." Luke turned to Sarah. He held her gaze for a moment, and something passed between them that was not warmth exactly, but was something. Recognition, maybe. 2 people who understood what it cost to hold a line. "Miss Calloway, I will need you to sign a protection order for this property. Keeps it under federal jurisdiction until the dispute is formally reviewed." "I know what a protection order does," she said. "I know you do." He produced the form from his coat pocket. Already prepared. He had known this was coming before she had. She signed it on the counter, using the post office pen, and he witnessed it without ceremony. When she looked up, Briggs and his men were already retreating down the street, not quickly enough to look like flight, but quickly enough to be gone. Luke picked up the torn document pieces from the boardwalk. Evidence. He tucked them into his coat. "They will be back," Sarah said. "Yes," he agreed. He put his hat back on. "Lock up at dark." He walked away without another word, and Sarah stood in the doorway watching him go, her heart still hammering in a way she would not admit to anyone. She had come to Coldwater 14 months ago with a trunk, a federal appointment letter, and the particular freedom of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Her husband Daniel had been charming and educated and completely dishonest. He had died owing money to 11 different men in 3 different states, and Sarah had spent the year after his death untangling the wreckage of a life built on fabrications. She had sold everything, paid what she could, and then she had applied for every federal position she could find, because federal positions came with rules, and rules were the only thing she trusted anymore. The postmaster appointment in Coldwater had been the one that came through. The town had not been welcoming. A widow running the post office was unusual enough. A widow who actually knew postal law and enforced it was something else entirely. She had refused to hold mail for Briggs's men when they tried to intercept letters addressed to other residents. She had reported 2 instances of mail tampering to the federal office. She had made enemies efficiently and without apology. She had also, slowly and without intending to, made one ally. Luke Calder had come into the post office 3 weeks after her arrival to pick up a package. He had waited in line behind 2 other customers without using his badge to skip ahead, which she had noticed. He had said please and thank you, which she had also noticed. And when old Mr. Vasquez ahead of him had struggled to read the address on a letter, Luke had quietly read it aloud for him without making it a moment. She had filed that away. She filed everything away. Their interactions since then had been professional and brief. He came in most mornings for the mail. She sorted it correctly and handed it over. Sometimes he asked questions about postal regulations, and she answered them, and she had the distinct impression he already knew the answers and was testing her, or perhaps simply confirming that she was who she appeared to be. She was not sure which. That evening, after she locked the post office and sat down with the account ledgers, she found something she had not been looking for. It started with a discrepancy in the freight manifests. 3 shipments logged as agricultural equipment, all addressed to a holding company she did not recognize, all routed through Coldwater in the past 6 months. The weights were wrong. Agricultural equipment did not weigh what these manifests claimed. And the holding company's address, when she looked it up in the territorial directory, did not exist. She sat with that for a long time, the coal oil lamp burning low, the night sounds of Coldwater settling around her. Then she got up and walked to the sheriff's office. Luke was still at his desk. He looked up when she came in, and she noticed he did not look surprised to see her, which meant he had been expecting something, though perhaps not her specifically. She put the manifests on his desk without preamble. These freight records have been falsified. The weights are inconsistent with the declared contents, and the receiving company does not exist in any territorial registry I can find. He looked at the papers. He looked at them for a long time. How long have you been tracking this? He asked. I noticed the first discrepancy 4 weeks ago. I have been building the record since then. She sat down across from him without being invited. I think Briggs has been using the freight route to move something he does not want documented. I think the attempt to seize the post office today was not about the property. It was about these records. Luke leaned back in his chair. The lamp on his desk threw shadows across his face, and for a moment he looked very tired, the way men looked when they had been carrying something heavy for a long time. I have been watching Briggs for 2 years, he said. I could not find the thread. You were looking at his finances, Sarah said. The thread was in the mail. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. Something quieter than that. What do you need from me? He asked. I need to know if you can protect the telegraph line. I want to send copies of these records to the state attorney's office, but if Briggs has someone at the telegraph station. He does, Luke said. Tom Heller. Been on Briggs's payroll for 8 months. Then I need another route. The eastbound mail rider leaves at dawn, Luke said. I can ride with him to the county seat myself. Hand deliver it. That takes you out of town for 2 days. I know. He met her eyes. Can you hold the post office for 2 days? She thought about the 6 men on the boardwalk that morning. She thought about Briggs's smile. Yes, she said. He nodded once. Then go home and lock your door. I will be at the post office at first light. He was there before first light. She saw him from the upstairs window of the small apartment above the post office where she lived. A figure in the pre-dawn dark, sitting on the bench outside, hat pulled low. He had been there for an hour at least. She could tell by the way he sat, settled and still, not recently arrived. She brought him coffee without comment. He accepted it the same way. You did not have to stay the night, she said. I was doing my rounds, he said. They both knew his rounds did not typically involve sitting motionless outside the post office for 3 hours. She did not push it. She had learned that Luke Calder communicated in actions, not explanations, and that pressing him for words he was not ready to give was like pressing on a bruise. It only made things worse. The mail rider came at 6. Luke spoke to him quietly, handed over the sealed packet of documents, and then swung up onto his own horse. He looked down at Sarah from the saddle. 2 days, he said. 2 days, she agreed. He rode east, and she went inside to open the post office, and she told herself the hollow feeling in her chest was simply the practical concern of a woman who had just sent her only real protection out of town. She almost believed it. The first day was quiet. Too quiet. Briggs's men did not come, which was worse in some ways than if they had. Absence meant planning. Mrs. Aldridge came in for her weekly letter from her daughter in San Antonio and stayed to talk for 20 minutes, which was how Sarah learned that Briggs had been telling people she had been falsifying postal records to cover her own debts, that she had come to Coldwater running from creditors, that her appointment was under review. None of it was true. All of it was the kind of thing that stuck. I do not believe a word of it, Mrs. Aldridge said firmly, patting Sarah's hand. But I thought you should know what is being said. After she left, Sarah stood at the counter for a moment, her hands very still on the wood. She had been here before. The whispers, the sideways looks, the slow erosion of a reputation she had worked to build. She had survived it once. She would survive it again. She went back to sorting the mail. The second day, 3 men came in who were not there for mail. They browsed the small selection of postal supplies she kept on the shelf, spoke to each other in low voices, and watched her. She served 2 actual customers around them, kept her movements unhurried, and when the men finally left without buying anything, she wrote down their names in her ledger. She knew all 3 of them. They worked for Briggs. That evening, someone threw a rock through the front window. She swept up the glass, boarded the window with planks from the storage room, and went to bed. Luke came back on the afternoon of the second day, earlier than she had expected. She saw him from the post office window, riding slow down the main street, dust rising behind him in the September heat. He had been gone for 2 days. She had told herself she did not miss him. She had almost believed it. He tied his horse to the post and came inside. His coat was covered in trail dust, his jaw rough with stubble, his eyes tired in a way that went deeper than just lack of sleep. "You're back early," she said. "Rode through the night." He set his hat on the counter. "Wanted to get back." "The documents?" "Delivered. The state attorney's office is moving on it." He paused. "You held." "I held." He looked at her then, and something in his expression shifted. Not softening, Luke Calder did not soften. But something underneath the stillness, something that looked like relief, or maybe something that looked like he had been holding his breath and had only just realized it. "Briggs's men didn't come back," Sarah said. "I know. I rode past his place on the way in. He's keeping his head down for now. That won't last." "No." He leaned against the counter, close enough that she could smell the dust and the horse and the particular scent of a man who had been riding through the night. "But it'll last long enough." Sarah busied herself with the mail trays, not because they needed sorting, but because she needed something to do with her hands. He was watching her. She could feel it. "You didn't have to ride through the night," she said. "I know. You could have stayed at the county seat. Slept in a real bed. Come back tomorrow." "I could have." She looked up at him. "Then why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment. The afternoon light came through the boarded window. She had not had time to replace the glass properly, and fell across the counter in long, dusty beams. "Because you're here," he said. "And because Briggs is dangerous. And because I've spent 7 years watching this town take care of itself, and I'm tired of watching." "That's 3 reasons," she said. "They're all the same reason." She set down the stack of letters. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. "Luke," she said, "I need to know something." "Ask." "You came to the post office that first time. 3 weeks after I arrived. You waited in line. You helped Mr. Vasquez read his letter." She held his gaze. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the boarded window, at the dust motes in the light, at the counter between them. Then he looked back at her. "Because everyone in this town had already decided who you were before you unpacked your trunk," he said. "A widow. A stranger. Someone who wouldn't last." He paused. "I wanted to see for myself." "And what did you see?" "Someone who wasn't trying to be liked." He held her eyes. "Someone who just did the work. That's rare here. Rarer than you'd think." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. Not pain. Something else. Something she had not felt since her husband died. The feeling of being seen, truly seen, not for what she could provide or what she represented, but for who she actually was. "I'm not easy to be around," she said. "I noticed. I don't trust people." "Neither do I." "Then how do you—" She stopped. Swallowed. "How do you know this isn't a mistake?" He reached across the counter. Not to touch her. Just to rest his hand on the wood near hers. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of it without contact. "I don't," he said. "But I've spent 7 years not making a move because I wanted to be sure. I'm done waiting for sure." Sarah looked at his hand. Calloused, scarred, steady. The hand of a man who had done hard things and would do them again. She did not move her hand away. "The window needs fixing," she said quietly. "I'll do it tomorrow. I could do it myself." "I know." The corner of his mouth moved. That was as close to a smile as Luke Calder ever came. "Let me anyway." She nodded. "Once. Small." He picked up his hat and walked to the door. At the threshold, he stopped and looked back at her. "Sarah." "Yes. I'm glad you came to Coldwater." He walked out before she could answer. She stood behind the counter for a long time, her hands still resting on the wood where his had been. The afternoon light shifted, the shadows lengthened, and she did not move. She thought about what he had said. "I'm done waiting for sure." She thought about the way he had said her name. Then she went back to sorting the mail, because that was what she did, and because she did not know what else to do with the feeling that had settled into her chest, warm and dangerous and entirely unexpected. He came through the boarded window first. She heard him on the boardwalk, heard him stop, heard the particular silence of a man taking in damage and calculating its meaning. Then he came through the door. She was behind the counter, sorting the afternoon delivery as if nothing had happened. He looked at the boarded window. He looked at her. His jaw was tight. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." "When?" "Last night. Around 10. He was quiet for a moment. "You should have sent for Deputy Marsh." "Deputy Marsh," Sarah said carefully, "has been eating lunch at Briggs's mill every day this week." Luke went very still. "I noticed," she said. "I notice things. It is what I do." He pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked like a man who was not entirely certain of his next move. It was a surprisingly human look on him. "The state attorney received the documents," he said. "He is sending an investigator. Should be here within the week. Briggs will know before the investigator arrives." "Yes. So we have a week of him knowing and being cornered." "Yes." She folded her hands on the counter. "Then we should talk about what that looks like." They talked for 2 hours. It was the longest conversation they had ever had, and it was entirely practical: routes, records, contingencies, who in town could be trusted and who could not. Luke knew the town's loyalties better than anyone. Sarah knew its paper trail better than anyone. Together they built something that was more than either of them had separately. At some point the lamp burned low, and she refilled it without interrupting the conversation, and he watched her do it with an expression she did not examine too closely. When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. "The window," he said. "I will have it repaired tomorrow. I can arrange that myself." "I know you can." He looked at her. "Let me." She held his gaze for a moment. "All right," she said. He nodded and left, and she stood in the lamplight for a long time after, her hand resting on the counter where they had spread the documents between them, thinking about the particular warmth of working alongside someone who did not need her to be less than she was. The week that followed was the most dangerous and the most clarifying of Sarah's time in Coldwater. Briggs moved fast. He called a town meeting, ostensibly about the upcoming election for a second council seat, and used it to publicly accuse Sarah of misappropriating federal funds. He had documents, forged, she was certain, but convincing to anyone who did not know what to look for. She sat in the back of the meeting hall and listened to him speak, and she felt the room's attention shift toward her, the weight of collective judgment, the particular discomfort of being the subject of a story someone else was telling about you. Then she stood up. "May I respond?" she asked. Briggs smiled. He thought she was going to defend herself. He thought she was going to be flustered and emotional and easy to dismiss. She walked to the front of the room and set her ledger on the podium. "These are the post office accounts for the past 14 months, she said. "Every transaction recorded, every discrepancy noted, every irregularity flagged and reported to the federal office. You are welcome to examine them." She turned a page. "These are the freight manifests for 6 shipments routed through Coldwater in the past year, all bearing falsified weights and addressed to a company that does not exist in any territorial registry." She turned another page. "And these are the tax records for the Briggs Land Company, cross-referenced with the freight invoices, showing a pattern of income that does not correspond to any declared business activity." The room was very quiet. "I am not a woman running from creditors," Sarah said. "I am a woman who spent a year untangling the financial wreckage left by a dishonest man, and I know exactly what falsified records look like. I know because I have seen them up close." She looked at Briggs. "I also know that the man who creates them always believes he has been careful enough." Briggs started to speak. He got 3 words out. Luke stepped up onto the platform behind her. He did not touch her. He stood at her back, one hand resting on his belt near his badge, and he looked out at the room with the flat, steady gaze of a man who had already decided how this ended. "Harlan Briggs," he said, "and the following individuals." He read 4 names from a paper in his hand. "You are under arrest pending investigation by the state attorney's office. You have the right to legal representation." He folded the paper. "I suggest you exercise it." The room erupted. Not in Briggs's favor. Sarah stood at the podium while Luke's deputy, not Marsh, who had been quietly suspended that morning, moved through the crowd. She felt the shift in the room, the way opinion moved like weather, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt like she belonged somewhere. The state investigator arrived 4 days later and spent 2 weeks in Coldwater. He examined Sarah's records, interviewed witnesses, and at the end of it, filed charges against Briggs and 7 associates for tax fraud, mail tampering, and attempted extortion. The day the investigator left, Sarah reopened the post office after a brief closure for the window repair. Luke had arranged it as promised, with glass that was actually better than the original, and found a line of customers waiting. Mrs. Aldridge was first. She bought 3 stamps she did not need and told Sarah she was the bravest woman in Coldwater. Sarah thanked her and did not argue. That evening, Luke came in at closing time. He did not have mail to collect. He stood at the counter with his hat in his hands, which was the most uncertain she had ever seen him look. "I wanted to say something," he said. "All right. I've been the sheriff here for 7 years. I have done this job the way I know how to do it, by the law, by the evidence, by what can be proven." He looked at the counter, then back at her. "I have never had a partner in it before." Sarah was quiet. "I am not good at saying things," he continued. "I am better at actions," she said. "I know." He looked at her. "Is that enough?" She thought about the 3 days he had sat outside her door, the coffee she had brought him in the dark, the 2 hours of conversation over a lamp burning low, the way he had stood at her back on that platform without being asked, without making it about himself, without taking anything from her. "It is more than enough," she said. He set his hat on the counter. He reached across and covered her hand with his, and it was the first time he had touched her, and it was not tentative. It was the same way he did everything, deliberate, certain, without performance. "I would like to take you to dinner," he said. "At Mrs. Wu's, if she has not changed the menu." "She has not," Sarah said. "She never does." "Good." He picked up his hat. 7 o'clock. He walked out, and Sarah stood at the counter with her hands still warm where his had been, and she was smiling before she realized it, the kind of smile that came from somewhere deep and unguarded, the kind she had almost forgotten she was capable of. Coldwater changed after the Briggs trial. Not all at once. Towns never changed all at once, but in the way that places change when the thing that had been wrong with them is finally named and removed. The mill changed hands. 2 of the council seats were refilled by election. The telegraph operator was replaced. Sarah stayed. She had not been certain she would. The federal appointment was renewable, not permanent, and she had spent enough of her life in places that did not want her to know the difference between being tolerated and being home. But Coldwater, slowly and imperfectly, became home. Luke came to the post office every morning. He still waited in line. He still said please and thank you. But now sometimes he stayed after the other customers left, leaning against the counter, talking about nothing in particular, a fence dispute on the North Road, a letter he had received from his brother in Colorado, the way the light looked on the hills in October. He was not a man who talked easily, but he talked to her. In November, he asked her to marry him in the post office, between the morning and afternoon mail, with no ceremony and no flourish. He simply said that he had been thinking about it for some time, and he believed they were well suited, and he would like her to consider it. She told him she would need a day to think. She did not need a day. She had known her answer since the morning she had brought him coffee in the dark, and he had accepted it without making it mean more than it was, and without pretending it meant less. She told him yes the following morning, when he came in for the mail. He nodded once, as if this confirmed something he had already known. Then he said, "I will speak to Reverend Mills." "I will need a new dress," she said. "I know a seamstress in San Antonio," he said. "I can write to her." "I can write to her myself," Sarah said. "I know you can." The corner of his mouth moved. "I will write to her anyway." They were married in December in the Coldwater church, with half the town in attendance. Mrs. Aldridge cried. The new telegraph operator, a young woman named Clara, who Sarah had quietly recommended for the position, threw rice with excessive enthusiasm. Luke stood at the altar with the same stillness he brought to everything, and when Sarah walked toward him, he watched her the way he watched everything that mattered, completely, without looking away. The post office remained federal property, protected under the charter Sarah had cited on that September morning when Briggs's men had come with their forged documents. She continued to run it. Luke continued to run the sheriff's office. They were, as he had said, well suited. Their first year of marriage was not without difficulty. A drought in the spring strained the whole county. A dispute over water rights brought tension that took months to resolve. Luke was shot in the shoulder during an arrest in March. Not seriously, but seriously enough that Sarah sat beside his bed for 2 days and did not leave, and when he told her she did not have to stay, she told him she was aware of that. He did not argue. She had learned, by then, that his silences were not distance. They were the way he held things, carefully, without spilling them. And she had learned that her own precision, her need for facts and evidence and things that could be proven, was not coldness. It was the armor she had built over a life that had taught her not to trust what could not be verified. Together, they were something neither had been alone. Not softer, exactly, but less defended. On the second anniversary of the day Briggs's men had come to the post office, Sarah found a package on the counter when she opened up in the morning. No sender listed. Inside was a new ledger, the finest she had ever seen, with her name embossed on the cover. She knew who had left it. She found Luke on his morning rounds and fell into step beside him, which she did sometimes when the mail was sorted and the morning was clear. "The ledger," she said. "You needed a new one," he said. "The old one is nearly full. It is a very fine ledger. You do very fine work." They walked in silence for a moment, past the mill and the feed store and the telegraph office where Clara was already at her station, past the church where they had been married and the boarding house where they had eaten their first dinner together. "Luke," Sarah said. I am glad I came to Coldwater." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "So am I." It was not a declaration. It was not a speech. It was the kind of thing he said when he meant it completely, and she had learned to hear the weight in it. She had learned to trust what could not always be proven. The morning light came over the hills and fell across the main street of Coldwater, and the town went about its business around them, and Sarah Calloway, Sarah Calder now, walked beside the man who had stood at her back when it mattered, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, entirely at home.